Imagine a street in a big city. The dead of night. A special forces team in black uniforms swiftly disembarks from a microbus. Their task is a lightning-fast assault, suppressing any resistance. In their hands, not the familiar Kalashnikov assault rifles. They hold something futuristic, menacing, with a long cylinder under the barrel, resembling a heating radiator. This isn't a space blaster. This is harsh Russian reality. This is the PP-19 Bizon, and that very cylinder is its heart, its main feature, and its curse. A helical magazine holding 64 rounds. This image became the hallmark of the 90s and 2000s in Russia. The Bizon is more than just a submachine gun. It is a symbol of an era, a symbol of the search for a way out of a weapon's dead end, a symbol of genius that collided with the harsh truth of life. And its story is the story of our country, its challenges, its economy, and its path. Today, we won't just skim through dry performance characteristics. We will immerse ourselves in this story head first. We will understand how and why it was born. We will see what economic situation underpinned its creation. We will figure out why this progressive weapon yielded to the simpler knight, and why, despite this, it is forever etched into memory, becoming an icon in computer games and films. The time of the wolfhounds, the birth of an idea. To understand the Bizon, you need to transport yourself to Russia in the early 90s. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The old order was gone, a new one was just being built. And in this lawless environment, amid total scarcity and criminal lawlessness, organized crime flourished. Gangsters armed themselves no worse than the army. The standard Makarov pistol, PM, was already underpowered for street shootouts. The Kalashnikov assault rifle, even its shortened version, the AK-74U, was excessive for urban operations. It could penetrate the thin walls of houses, posing a threat to civilians. The Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Russian Federation urgently needed a new weapon, compact like a pistol, but with the fire density of an assault rifle. Effective at short ranges up to 150 meters. And most importantly, with a huge ammunition capacity. Because in a close-quarters battle in a tight space or on a city street, there's no time to reload. It was necessary to suppress the enemy with a hail of fire. The order went to the Izhevsk machine-building plant, the cradle of Soviet and Russian firearms artistry. And here's where it gets interesting. The project was entrusted not just to talented engineers. It was a meeting of, one could say, weapons aristocracy. Two men with the blood of legendary creators flowing in their veins. Viktor Mikhailovich Kalashnikov, the son of the Mikhail Timofeyevich Kalashnikov, creator of the AK-47. Just imagine the burden and the pride he carried. He could not disgrace the family name. He had to create something worthy of the surname. Alexei Yevgenyevich Dragunov, the son of Yevgeny Fyodorovich Dragunov, the genius of sniper systems, creator of the famous SVD. Another dynasty, another challenge. Their union was like the confluence of two rivers. The experience in assault rifle design from the Kalashnikovs and the precision, meticulousness of solutions from the Dragunovs. They were given an extremely difficult task to create a fundamentally new weapon, but with an eye on existing, proven designs. Why? The answer lies in the economic reality. Economic background, Russia in the 90s. Let's digress for a second and look at the conditions in which the Bizon was born. The 90s in Russia are not just wild. It was a time of total economic collapse. Hyperinflation, the disintegration of industrial supply chains. The budget of the security forces was extremely limited. There was no money for full-scale R&D from scratch. Factories like the one in Izhevsk were surviving as best they could. They needed to preserve their workforce, machine tools, and technologies. In such conditions, the main principle was born: make something new, using as much of the old as possible. This was not a whim, but a harsh necessity. It was necessary to maximize the unification of the new weapon with what was already in production. This reduced cost, accelerated production setup, and simplified soldier training and field repairs. It was this economic imperative that determined the fate of the Bizon. The designers did not reinvent the wheel. They took as a basis what was well known to every Russian soldier and officer, that very shortened Kalashnikov assault rifle, the AK-74U. The heart of the beast, the design of the Bizon. So, the base, the AK-74U. A brilliant decision. About 60% of the Bizon's parts were borrowed from the Ksuka, the receiver, the trigger mechanism, many elements of the stock. What did this achieve? Cost reduction. No need to set up production for new parts. Reliability. The Kalashnikov trigger mechanism is a benchmark of reliability. It had been tested for decades. Familiarity. A soldier familiar with the AK could practically pick up the Bizon without retraining. Disassembly, assembly, basic handling principles, everything was familiar. But here is where the magic begins. If Kalashnikov and Dragunov had simply screwed a new magazine onto the AK-74U, it wouldn't have been the Bizon, but just another modification. They went much further. They revolutionized the feeding system. Operation. The AK operates on a gas-operated system. Powder gases through a port in the barrel push a piston, which actuates the bolt group. Reliable, but for a compact submachine gun, unnecessarily complex. The Bizon uses a simpler and cheaper scheme, a blowback system. The recoil from the shot simply pushes the heavy bolt back. It compresses the spring and then returns, chambering a new round. Simpler, lighter, ideal for pistol cartridges. And now, the main highlight, the helical magazine. Imagine not a box, but an Archimedes screw, a spiral inside which cartridges are stacked like peas in a pod. This ingenious, almost alien construction became the hallmark of the Bizon. Why the helix? Because the task was immense capacity. A standard box magazine for 30 or 40 rounds would have been long and inconvenient. To make a magazine for 64 rounds in the form of a stick, it would turn into a long, clumsy pole that would hinder movement, snag on everything, and rapid reloading would be out of the question. The helix solved this problem. It compactly housed an incredible number of cartridges under the barrel. A fighter with a Bizon could sustain continuous fire 1.5 to 2 times longer than his opponent with a conventional SMG. In a fleeting street battle, this was a decisive advantage. One long burst, and the enemy is suppressed. But, like any brilliant idea, the helix had its own drawbacks. The disadvantages not advertised: complexity and cost. Producing such a spiral with precise grooves, ensuring uninterrupted cartridge feed, is a technologically complex and expensive task. This isn't a stamped piece of sheet metal. It's a high-precision component. Weight. The helical magazine, fully loaded with 64 rounds, weighed a lot. The total weight of the weapon with ammunition exceeded 3 kilograms. Quite heavy for a submachine gun. Reloading. Loading was slower than a regular magazine. It was necessary to carefully, one by one, place the cartridges into the spiral. In combat conditions under stress, this could become a problem. Tactical limitations. The ferend, the part you hold the weapon by, on the Bizon, was essentially this very magazine. Sights, flashlights, laser target pointers. There was simply nowhere to attach them. The weapon became naked. But in the 90s, when the main question was firepower at any cost, these shortcomings were overlooked. The large family of the Bizon, a platform for all. One of the designer's greatest successes was that they created not just a single weapon, but a whole platform. A universal system that could be adapted to different needs and, most importantly, to different cartridges. This was a strategic move that opened doors both to the domestic market and for export. Let's go through the most famous family. Bizon II, base model, worked with the classic Soviet 9 by 18mm PM cartridge, the same one used for the Makarov pistol. Reliable, proven, but not the most powerful. Its enhanced version, the PMM, was more interesting. Bizon 201, entering the international arena. This was a key modification. It was converted for the 9 by a 19mm Parabellum cartridge, the global NATO standard. Why is this important? Export economic analysis. In the 90s and 2000s, Russia was desperately in need of hard currency. Arms exports were one of the few stable sources of income. Offering the world a weapon for its unique 9 by 18 mm cartridge was commercial suicide. No one would buy it and create a separate logistics chain for a rare ammunition. But a Bizon for the standard NATO cartridge, that was a serious proposition. However, the magazine capacity for the longer Parabellum cartridge had to be reduced to 53 rounds. But even that was phenomenally high. Bizon 202 for the 9 by 17 mm Browning short cartridge. This cartridge is even weaker than the PM. What is it for? For security services, object guards, where the risk of wall penetration and hitting bystanders was critically high. For civilian structures that don't need excessive power. Bizon 207, a nostalgic retro move. This version was created for the old, but very energetic 7.62 by 25 mm cartridge from the TT pistol. Sounds strange? Not at all. This cartridge was still stored in huge quantities in the warehouses of many countries of the former Warsaw Pact and in some countries in Asia and Africa, offering them a cheap and effective weapon for their old but abundant ammunition. That was a brilliant marketing ploy. And for this model, not only the Helix was offered, but also a traditional box magazine for 35 rounds. There were other modifications, with an integrated silencer for silent shooting, semi-automatic civilian versions for self-defense, which, however, did not really catch on in the market. In the fire, combat use, and the harsh truth. The Bizon was not a museum piece. It was tested in blood. Its baptism by fire took place during the fierce conflicts in the North Caucasus. The Second Chechen Campaign, raids in Dagestan. This was its testing ground. Feedback from the fighters was mixed. On one hand, they loved it for its firepower. In close combat, during building assaults, the Bizon's fire density was devastating. A burst of 64 rounds left the enemy no chance. It was a weapon of psychological pressure. But on the other hand, all those tactical disadvantages the engineers talked about manifested themselves. The inability to mount a flashlight for night fighting. The inconvenience of carrying due to the forward-shifted center of gravity. And most importantly, the unreliability of the magazine in conditions of sand, dirt, and dust. A tiny grain of sand that got into the complex feeding mechanism of the Helix could cause a stoppage. And a stoppage in battle means death. It was in these conditions that the demand for something simpler, more reliable, and more tactically flexible was born. The sunset of a legend. Why the Bizon yielded to the night. By the early 2000s, the economic and tactical situation in Russia had changed. The budget became more stable. The strategy of the security forces shifted towards standardization. A fateful decision was made to transition to a unified pistol cartridge, 9 by 19 mm Parabellum. For this, the Yergin pistol, or PA, was adopted. The Izhevsk plant, now the Kalashnikov concern, was well aware of the Bizon's shortcomings. And in 2004, the world saw its logical successor, the PP-19 Knight. The Knight is the same Bizon platform, the same reliability, the same ergonomics. But the Helical magazine was mercilessly discarded as unnecessary. Its place was taken by a conventional, reliable, cheap-to-produce box magazine for 30 rounds from the Yergin pistol PA. It would seem a step back? No, it was a huge step forward. Cheapness. Producing Knights was many times cheaper. Reliability. A simple magazine is much less finicky. Tactical flexibility. The Knights Firen featured Picatinny rails for mounting anything you could want. Flashlights, lasers, foregrips, bipods. Reload speed. Changing a magazine on the Knight takes seconds. The Knight proved to be more practical, convenient, and cost-effective. It fit perfectly into the new concept of the Russian Army and the National Guard. And it almost completely displaced the Bizon from the production line. The legend faded into the background. Immortality in culture. Why we remember the Bizon. But fate is a strange thing. If the Knight became a workhorse, the Bizon became a cultural phenomenon. Its unique, unlike anything else appearance made it a star of Hollywood action movies, though mostly Russian-produced, and more importantly, computer games. The Bizon is in Counter-Strike, Global Offensive, where it is valued for its huge magazine. It is in the gloomy post-apocalyptic world of the Metro game, where it looks absolutely organic. It is in the hardcore Escape from Tarkov, where its performance characteristics are reproduced with meticulous accuracy. In the virtual world, its disadvantages, price, weight, are negated, and its advantages, power and capacity, come to the fore. For millions of players around the world, the Bizon is not an outdated specimen of weapons thought. It's a cool, coveted imba gun, and this is its second birth and immortality. Conclusion. The lessons of the Bizon. So what is the PP-19 Bizon? It is a monument to brilliant engineers who, in the most difficult economic conditions, managed to create something unique. It is a monument to the era of the wild 90s, with its challenges and chaos. It is an example of how a brilliant technical idea can yield to a simple, pragmatic, and effective one. The Bizon was a bold experiment. It showed that Russian gunsmiths are not afraid to think outside the box. It laid the foundation for a successful platform that lives on today in the form of the Knight. Its history is the history of a compromise between genius and practicality. And in this dispute, alas, practicality almost always wins. But does this diminish its glory? Not all, because legends do not die. They retire to live forever in our hearts, in memory, and in the pixels of virtual battles. So ends our saga of the PP-19 Bizon. I hope I managed to convey to you all the drama and genius of this story. Now it's your turn. Write in the comments what you think. In a fight, would you prefer the futuristic Bizon with its huge magazine or the practical Knight? Have you encountered the Bizon in games or movies? How did it perform? Do you think the Bizon could have been more successful if it had been further refined? Your opinion is priceless to me. And of course, if you've made it this far and haven't subscribed, do it now and hit the bell, because ahead of us are many more untold stories about legendary weapons, their creators, and the secrets hidden behind factory walls. Thank you for being with us.